This is interesting. Uh, what do you think about art fairs? How important are art fairs for Half Gallery? You know, the ones that you participate.
Less important this year.
Yeah.
Um, well, it was interesting. You mentioned FIAC. I mean, that's one of my favorite fairs. I think the first time we did FIAC with this Irish painter, Genevieve Figgis, like 3 years ago, we were upstairs, but there was a window across from our booth, and I could see the Eiffel Tower out the window. That I'm like, what art fair has views like that? Also, it's in the Grand Palais, and that's quite dramatic. Um, yeah, art fairs used to be more important because you would get a global audience, coming through. I think it still carries a level of prestige. So, for instance, we just got into Art Basel Miami for the first time this year, which is a very difficult fair to get into. Now,
Mhm.
it was only online, but we set up what our booth would have been in Miami at the gallery in New York for that week. So people that had the ability, that are in New York could come see uh, our Art Basel booth in person at the gallery, or anyone could see it online around the world. I feel like those probably, I know that Freeze New York is saying that they're still potentially doing a fair in person in May. I feel like realistically it'll be this fall, meaning, September, October of 2021 before you might see people back at art fairs in person.
Yeah. So, is there any difference in the art audience like between European art audience, continental European art audience, and Americans? Do you have you felt such a difference when you were in FIAC, for example?
Well, I'm not sure if the art that I brought would illustrate that, because I showed Tanya Merrill, who makes these kind of um, a lot of art historical references in her paintings, and the year before that, Genevieve Figgis, that kind of um, is riffing off of uh, you know Renaissance paintings and Fragonard, and so I'd have to, I never tried to bring like a Sol LeWitt wall drawing to FIAC, so I'm not sure if I can answer that based on my own experience. I think within any country, there's different uh, types of gallery visitors. So there's some people that are trophy hunting that just want something because there's heat on it. And then there's other people, sometimes they buy, sometimes they don't, that are just looking for new ideas and new ways of seeing the world. Or there's other collectors that have a specific vision in mind. Like I know that Marty Eisenberg, who's in New York, he loves works on paper. So that's one of the focuses of his collection.
Uh, do you try to help your collectors to shape a bit their collections, or do you try to guide them a bit about their collections?
Well, I mean, I think by and large, we probably show figurative painting for the most part. So I think really it would just be in terms of the artists that we're exhibiting would be obviously the most straightforward recommendations of what um, I think they would be interested in. But sometimes artists come up in different groups or kind of their own, even if they're not associated, like Luis Bonet, who I did a show with in 2017. I know that she's a fan of Tanya Merrill, and Tanya Merrill's a fan of her work. So even though they didn't go to school together, they're kind of both like rising up at different speeds, but um, people are aware of them at the same time. And so sometimes that creates not necessarily a school, but kind of a community of artists that are emerging at the same time.
Do you follow the graduation exhibitions? Are you very much involved with art school students production? And if yes, how do you follow them? Is there any special
So,
uh,
for instance,
page?
Tanya Merrill, I think she was in a group show years ago before we started working with her with three other artists. I only looked at that group show because an artist I was working with was in it. And when I saw it, I was like, wait a second, who's this? And it turned out Tanya was still in school at Columbia's MFA program um, in New York, Columbia University. So when they had open studios, I went to go visit her. And it took about a year, I think, because she really wanted to graduate school before she was showing. And so, for instance, she was in the same class as Hugh Hayden, who now shows at Listen and Clearing. So there's an example of, people kind of coming up together. Also, through Tanya's boyfriend, she's friendly with Calvin Marcus, who also shows at Clearing. So there's kind of this network that emerges organically. Um, Someone like Vaughn Spann, I met visiting Yale a few years ago, their graduate program. But I was actually going to visit a different artist, and then I wound up meeting Vaughn, and then Vaughn introduced me to Natalie Ball, who's the Native American artist that we showed most recently at Art Basel Miami. So, I don't think you can lean too heavily on art schools because not everyone, just because you went there is going to have a strong vision or practice. But it seems like there's always one or two uh, artists to come out of those programs that have real potential. Heejin we met when she was at UCLA's graduate program. I think in 2018 she graduated.
I was asking that because I keep asking same questions to galleries I invite. Would you be interested to a product of, for example, seeing all the student works at the graduation? It's like a list. Uh, think of access database that you can access uh, country by country, school by school, so that you can have chance to compare, select, shortlist, etc. Um,
Well,
what do you think
sometimes
could be
that can
interesting?
be a little bit daunting because if you did that globally, that you'd be looking at thousands of art students every year. I feel like it would be interesting if you picked five people from each school and did it that way. I don't know if internationally um, we see that in America. I mean, I know I've visited somebody at Slade in the UK, but I haven't visited any art schools outside of the United States other than in London.
Yeah, I mean, such a database would it be useful for galleries? I mean, would you like to be
I just think it could,
subscribe? Hmm?
like everything in life, that could maybe use some editing first.
Mhm.
I think it
That,
could be useful, but I think you'd want to see, you could have some kind of selection committee within the even undergrad. Sometimes I think Joe Bradley, who shows at Gagosian, only went to RISD undergrad. So I don't think graduate school is a prerequisite. It's
mhm.
just gives you more time to develop your voice.
But do you think that some schools are like golden golden key for success? I mean,
I don't think there's any guarantee. I think sometimes we all want to be discovered or have, you know, fairy dust thrown on us. That usually it's a lot of hard work, and you have to get lucky. So yeah, I would say statistically, probably a place like Yale's graduate program has turned out a lot of, you know, whether it's John Curran or Lisa Yuskevich, um, or Von Span, that they've turned out a lot of great artists. So it helps.
Mhm.
But it would be a bummer to be one of the artists that went there and, you know, spent 150,000 on your education and no one cares about your art. It really depends on the
That's
individual more than the school.
that's right. What do you think about selling art online? Do you think this is getting a serious option for galleries? Does this mechanism may work? I mean, without
I mean, I
showing.
think I saw some data that Christie said that they project something like 40% of their sales will be online for next year. So it's just a reality of the business globally right now. I would say if it's much harder when it's an artist that you've never seen the work in person. Kind of like once I've seen what a, let's say, a George Baslit's wooden sculpture looks like, now I know if I see one online, I have a better idea of what that would feel like in person. So it can be tricky. I mean, I think especially, you know, with painting or sculpture, something can have a very different feeling in terms of the surface and the texture when you see it in person as opposed to uh, in a JPEG. I think it's a reality. I think it's always better if you've seen that artist before in person before you see it online.
Yeah.
I would say it's the last thing. It's almost like, would you rather? It's kind of like when celebrities get too much plastic surgery. Like they look great in a picture, but like, how do you look in person? You know?
That's right. That's right. So showing for young artists, for artists which no name at the beginning,
Yeah.
they need to be shown and interacted with the public.
Well, for instance, um, Nathaniel Mary Quinn, who's I did his first New York show in 2017, and he's now repped by Gagosian, and Almin Rush, that his work kind of looks like collage if you see an image, uh, you know, on a computer, but then in person you realize, wait a second, this is um, gouache and pastel and oil stick and drawing, and so it would be easy to kind of write it off as collage, but then when you find out that it's all these different mediums, it just gives you an added respect for the visual.
You're right. You're right. By the way, the fact that your artists are now at at top galleries, it's a sign that you're future Gagosian or something. Because this is a strong sign that your eye catches good artists. What do you think about that? You must be very proud of your eye.
Well, I mean, I think for an artist, they should have as big a stage as they can handle. So I've set up kind of a unique business model where when I introduce an artist to a bigger gallery, then we get a commission from the first show or the first two shows. So I think that encourages me to try and, you know, find the best venues globally. We only have a gallery in New York. Obviously, it's a big world. So if there's a gallery in Tokyo that wants to show a young painter that we work with, seems like a good idea to me.
Why not to have a show in Istanbul? I will propose you a good gallery that you can work with. Have you been in Istanbul? What do you think about Turkish art market?
I know absolutely nothing about the Turkish art market. I'm sorry.
And you haven't been in Istanbul.
I haven't. I haven't been to Istanbul.
There is C24 gallery in New York City, just across, I think across Gagosian, if I'm not wrong,
Which
at,
one?
at Chelsea.
Okay.
At Chelsea.
Um, I mean, I'll look for it. Maybe not today, but
Yeah. So that's the only Turkish gallery. They're working quite well. They have some Turkish artists, but mostly international artists.
yeah.
Uh, yes, I'm not surprised for that because it is difficult to be to live, to work, to produce as an artist, and not live in a big art centers. What do you think about that? Do you think
I don't
that's
think
an
that's
obstacle?
necessarily the case because someone like Genevieve Figgis, who I did her first show in New York City in 2014, she lives in a small town outside Dublin in Ireland. I think it's harder, but I don't think you have to be in a big city.
But then how she made? How she made it? What
Well,
helped her? What
in
helped her
in
to
her
arrive?
case, she was discovered by Richard Prince on Twitter, and
Mm.
he bought some paintings, and then he introduced me to her work, and then it kind of um, built from there.
This is interesting. So again, we see the role of social media at some point, creating networks.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of times it just depends. You know, when we were talking about Asuka Anastasia Gawa, whose painting I showed you before, um, I had met her through a director at Blum and Poe who had seen her work in a show that Henry Taylor had organized at his studio of Asuka's paintings. This director had bought a painting and thought that Asuka was really talented and suggested I get in touch with her. So, you know, there's just no one way of getting discovered. I think, you know, for someone, let's say I'm doing a show with this woman Anna Park, who's Korean but grew up largely in the United States, and we'll do her American solo debut in April of 2021. I was doing a lecture with a different artist at the New York Academy of Art, and I stumbled across one of her drawings, and that's what started that relationship. So I think you just have to keep your eyes open, but there's not any one formula or means of discovery.
But I still believe that for artists living in distant geographies to use Instagram and other social media carefully to try to reach and get connected with people. But again, talent is the most important issue here. I mean, if you're talented and plus you have the lucky, yes, and
Yeah,
maybe also some patience. The story of Matthew Wong,
yeah.
the Canadian artist, who unfortunately ended his life. His story is interesting because I know him also. I was following him from Facebook as well because he was Canadian, and I'm Canadian too, and I started to follow him, and then I knew his story of his path of learning art, and that was also interesting. And what do you think about this incredible rise of his
Well,
artwork
I think I was at the first group show um,
at Karma?
that he was in at the beach in when they had an outpost in Amagansett, and it was a group show organized by Matthew Higgs, who's the director at White Columns in New York, which is a nonprofit space. And I was there because in the same group show, another artist that I work with, Daniel Heidkamp, had paintings in that show. So, uh, yeah, I think that was 2017. So that was incredibly fast. I remember seeing Matthew and his mother come visit Half Gallery uptown. I think, it's a little bit, I don't want to say gross, but that somebody kills themselves and then all of a sudden everyone's trying to buy up all the work, including some of the galleries are trying to buy back the work from collectors that they sold it to at a slightly higher price because they anticipated that it would go up a lot from there. um I mean, I guess that's just the reality of what happened in that situation. It seems a little bit like people, profiting off of this guy's death. Traditionally, if you look at someone like Warhol or Basquiat, it might have taken 10 or 15 years before their market really increased dramatically after their death.
Hmm.